Fighting games. From the simple couch squabble to some of the biggest events and moments in competitive gaming or esports. They are fast, impactful, and not to mention personal with how close you are to your opponent, duking it out through punches that you can really feel when you're in it to win it. Despite this, that's not what we're focusing on today. Fighting games are not only open for fantastic moments with adrenaline pumping fun, they also have a wide range of artistic capabilities. How can these games, even ones that are so old now, show so much artistic prowess and emotion? Fluid animation, beautiful, vibrant colors, impeccable design, and music that always keeps the blood pumping. I'm going to go through some of the most respected fighting games throughout the past 30 years or so, especially the ones I like a lot, and show you how far these games would go to catch people's eyes. Not only did these older arcade games have to catch the attention of the people walking by the machines, but they also had the leg room of not having to develop massive stages for the player to go through, and instead, because of how there were only a couple of characters in a confined space, they could go all out on the actual design of the game. So with that being said, let's start at the most appropriate game that gave birth to the fighting game genre. Has my attention right now, just look at this marketing. In 1991, Street Fighter II was what brought upon one of the last great eras for arcades, fully popularizing the concept of fighting real-life opponents in a one-on-one test for glory. Nothing looked or played like Street Fighter II did at the time. Looking at the visuals, there is a great amount of emphasis on not just the character's design and artwork, but also the expressive animation of the characters. Not to mention, the overall attention to detail and effort placed on the backgrounds and characters that inhabit them have not gone to the same extent that Street Fighter did. As well as the victory or defeat screens and character portraits really put this game's visuals above most other games that were out at the time, artistically and graphically. With Street Fighter II out, the golden age of fighting games arrives, with Street Fighter II being its bombastic start. Arcades were putting out new fighting games left and right for everyone to sink their teeth into. Lots of ballz clones, unfortunately. These games would show their own merits of design through Darkstalker's meticulous attention to detail and UI design, and Heritage for the Future's unbelievable homage to the source material with its fan service, voice acting, and flashiness. Not even to scratch the surface, really. After the massive load of 2D fighters, 3D would take the spotlight in the industry, making most people be somewhat deterred from pretty much any 2D game. To be fair, it was for good reason. These graphics and polygons on these models were so advanced for the time. Like I said, because of how most of the design in fighting games relies upon the character models, stages, and animations, instead of worrying about the level design, smaller enemies, or anything that would not really fit a fighting game, these were the games that usually advanced the industry with the tech they had. Virtua Fighter and Tekken would be the big breakouts into 3D at the time, with amazing models, immersive arenas, and realistic animations. Tekken in particular went above and beyond with its 3D capabilities to the point where it could not necessarily run as fast or as smooth as the previous 2D stuff. They focused more on precision with more strategic specific inputs and the wider range of the arena being able to move in other directions, because of 3D, of course. Despite this, Virtua Fighter tried to keep up with the overall speed and instant action of the older fighting games in comparison to Tekken. Nonetheless, to this day, I think Virtua Fighter has a pretty charming art style to it, at least more so to the really early Tekken games. Another thing these games had in common was their use of martial arts, with both of them being more involved in a realistic fighting sense with a variety of real-life maneuvers that helped make them stand after the plethora of 2D fighting games. Both of these games did well in their own favor, allowing Tekken and Virtua Fighter to pave the way of 3D fighters side by side, but if we are going to talk about the peak of this era's 3D fighting games, there is one game that really comes to mind: Tekken 3. Anyways, long story short, these games were going hard, looking good doing it, and people were eating them up. Let's backpedal a little bit back into 2D games, which were still exploding amidst the turn of this 3D area. As a matter of fact, 2D fighters were only getting better as time went on, even with the focus beginning to shift. One game that is worth mentioning that is kind of 3D, but not really, is Killer Instinct. Using the same technology and company as Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct took detailed scans of 3D sculptures to make the character models and bring the most out there ones to life, similar to how Mortal Kombat took scans of people and placed them in a standard fighting game background. However, Killer Instinct would put these highly detailed models on top of a 3D plane, but they could only really still move left and right, so it really was a 2D fighter in the end. However, it really got interesting restructuring the concept of combos with a more procedural take on them, but I'm not supposed to be talking about that. Street Fighter 3 came out at the end of the 90s, but would not be appropriately recognized until many years later. Well, nowadays known as Third Strike. Or it was back then. Probably because of this guy. Despite the fact it had some of the smoothest animation 2D video games could offer, even to this day, others like Marvel vs. Capcom were still really huge at the time, with all the recognizable characters from massive franchises, extremely fast and eccentric gameplay, and a more unique style of play with 2v2 combat. It had fantastic presentation and extremely impactful animation that would be brought back with MVC2, along with 3D backgrounds to accompany the 2D sprites, bringing in another unique style. One thing that also stands out a lot in this game is the music. The early to mid-2000s were pretty dry with the inevitable death of the arcade scene in mostly pop culture as well as many countries, and the massive rise of home console gaming. Sure, there were definitely some hits like Soul Calibur and Tekken, but not anything to really reignite the scene. That was until the success of Street Fighter 4. Publishers realized, oh, people still like these games. So with that, we arrive at the true modern era of fighting games with King of Fighters, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Killer Instinct 2013, and Injustice. Even some of the classic kings of the genre like Tekken, Mortal Kombat, and Guilty Gear were able to bring their A-game in the recent years. Speaking of Street Fighter 4, it was a great way to reintroduce the Street Fighter formula in a modern take with a fantastic 3D art style that really does capture what Street Fighter is all about, but just in a new light. However, before I get into this beautiful world of fighting games we live in today, I haven't dwelled too deeply into the music of fighting games because there are plenty of examples of fantastic fighting game music out there from the years past, i.e. pretty much most of the games I mentioned before. Today's fighting game music absolutely does not hold back. From Guilty Gear to Tekken 7, fighting game music has only grown more consistently harder. Smash Bros. Has a pretty unique take on music for its game by either remixing, playing classic video game music but from a live orchestra, or bringing a completely different take on a previous song that is well recognized. King of Fighters has amazing mashups of various genres of music like jazz and rock. Don't even get me started on Marvel vs. Capcom's music, just listen for yourself. Next game. Speaking of KOF, or King of Fighters, games like KOF 13 show a lot of the peak of fully realized 2D art in fighting games, with unbelievably impeccable animation that really does live up to the style of the greats like Third Strike. Modern Tekken has an even more bold and shiny look to it that really sets it apart from other fighting games, with the gameplay being even more technical and precise. It takes great strides in making sure what connects and what doesn't through various effects, lighting, and fantastically animated choreography with these 3D models. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has a great comic-like 3D art style, bringing in new, popular, and even obscure characters from both Marvel and Capcom to create such a fluid, fast, and wonderfully flashy style. These modern fighting games have pretty much brought the fighting game scene to one of its greatest peaks that haven't been seen since the 90s. So with that, let's bring up some of the most beautiful, exquisite examples of some of my favorite fighting games that have come out in recent years. Without a shadow of a doubt, ballz, Dragon Ball Fighter Z, or Fighters, I don't give a shit about how you say it, Guilty Gear, and every other fighting game that the developer Arc System Works has created has been pushing the envelope in terms of not just fighting game presentation, but pretty much just presentation for the medium as we know it. We'll start off with Fighter Z, because, oh my. It's just incomprehensible how not only it looks so incredibly close to the actual show that it's uncanny, but how they are able to transfer full-on different art styles from each era of Dragon Ball into the third dimension. It's incredibly flashy, impactful, all things you can expect from a Dragon Ball game, but this one just pushes it to as far as the franchise can go with its animation, effects, transitions, whew, etc. It's beautiful. Let's have a look at Guilty Gear Strive now. Okay then. If you thought Dragon Ball Fighter Z was cool, my brother in Christ, you have seen nothing. Strive is a great showcase for how even after Fighter Z, they're still able to evolve with their style. Goodness gravy, the style of this game is so impossibly defined. There's a story mode where there isn't even any gameplay, it's literally just a movie. You would assume that would make more people angry, but how could you possibly be mad when you have to look at this eye candy for several hours? That's how much confidence is flowing throughout this game. It's even more impactful than Fighter Z even, with characters being hit with such force, which is shown masterfully through its animation, and even flying in the air, hitting a new part of the map when shattered through a corner is so cool. Oh, I forgot to mention the music for this game earlier. That's a cardinal sin. What we have here is pretty much the magnum opus of fighting game music, or at least I believe so. A blending of so many genres, mostly rock, instruments, vocals, and so much more to show just how far fighting games have come as a whole. With all this said, we are far from done with innovation and greatness with fighting games, especially from Arc System Works. We have so many games in the works, from DNF Duel to Street Fighter 6. I don't have much to say about Street Fighter 5 because it just kind of applies to Street Fighter 4, but I have so many more games to talk about, like the later Virtual Fighters, the other King of Fighters, more fighters. From Street Fighter 2 to Fighter Z, fighting games have evolved not just mechanically but artistically, and with games like Guilty Gear and KOF, they show no sign of stopping. Regardless, I do miss the simpler times. Anyways, party people, that's pretty much it. Comment, like, subscribe, do what you will. Share, please. I want John Fighting Game to see this, And you can comment with your favorite fighting game in terms of visuals if you want, but just know if it's not ballz, it's probably going to be deleted, so yeah, just be aware of that, so have a good one.